Welcome to Papermaking with Arnold Grummer. Arnold Grummer is the past curator of the Dard Hunter Paper Museum and author of 2 books on papermaking. Today, Mr. Grummer will show us how to make paper with a dip hand mold. He'll answer some commonly asked questions and teach us 3 easy papermaking techniques. Here's Mr. Grummer.
Well, let's show and discuss a dip hand mold. We have one here. Dip hand molds will have these particular pieces or their equivalent. Every hand mold is going to have some kind of a screen upon which you can form the sheet. They will have some kind of a decal. Usually goes on top of the screen. Many will have some kind of a support grid such as this or its equivalent. And with those items, you're ready to go. The assembly of the kit is quite simple. The screen goes on top of the grid and the decal on top of the screen. Now we're ready to dip this into a vat full of pulp, which brings to mind the fact that we have to have a vat full of pulp. How do you get that? Well, to get a successful sheet on here of the right thickness, not too thick, not too thin, one has to have a certain ratio of water to fiber in here. If it's too thin, you'll get too thin a sheet. If it's too thick, you'll get too thick a sheet. So we are suggesting this formula. It works very well. This is an 8.5 by 11 sheet. If you use this with 4 cups of water, your ratio in your vat is going to be just about right. So let's do that. We have, at this point, taken 4 of these sheets, recycled them in the blenders we're going to show you in a moment, and with 4 cups of water in each case. So that we have in here. Now we want 5 sheets altogether for a vat this size. Regardless of the size of vat that you use, if you get 2 inches deep of pulp in it, you'll be able to handle a dip kit like this. So to get that 2 inches, we're going to recycle one more 8.5 by 11 sheet. I kind of like this waste paper. You can use new pulp if you like, and you disperse that in the blender in the same way. Frankly, if you take new pulp, lay it out and dry it, this is what you have. So any paper is pulp, and we're going to use this paper. It's used often for cushioning things in shipping, and it's a real fine fiber. I like the way it works when we recycle it. So you tear the paper up, and a good way to do that is tear it, put it together, tear it again. A lot of people tear one piece off at a time. It takes like 3 years to get this torn out. But if you tear it, put it together, and tear it up like that, and put it in your blender, that's fine. Now we're going to add 4 cups of water, which keeps the right ratio that we were talking about, 2, 3, 4. Now, this is not exactly rock music that you're going to hear now. This is going to run the blender. We turn the blender on, and I use about a medium speed because that's about the right amount of mechanical action and not too fast. So we'll turn that on. And there goes our blender. Now you can watch through the side of the blender and see when there aren't any little pieces left. Then you have turned that paper back to the pulp from which it was made. 30 seconds should take just about any paper you can find and turn it back into the pulp. Find the off button there, and there we are. Now we have turned the paper that you saw back into the pulp, and that we will add to the vat. Now, as I said, we have a total of 5 8.5 by 11 sheets with 4 cups of water for each one when we recycled it. That gives me the 2 inches that I need, and we're ready to dip a sheet, which is the really exciting part about paper making. So as we said, grid, screen on top of it, decal on top of that, and we're ready to go. Oh, just before we do that, let me point out, if you have a screen of this quality, and all of our kits, we have the same screen that's used on a $250 million paper machine. Now that's a fabulous substance, and there isn't anything better anywhere. But you have to take care of it right. And one of the things that is very good to do is to scrub the screen and make sure it is wet all over. That will assure you of a very good sheet formation. Now, we'll put it back on the grid as we did before, put that on top of there, and we are ready to dip a sheet. There are several ways you can handle this hand mold in relation to the pulp that you have in there. The first thing you have to do is to get the pulp absolutely evenly distributed, and that is exceedingly important. You will not have good results if you don't get this evenly distributed, the fibers in the pulp evenly distributed. So now we have that done. We take this, drop it down vertically all the way to the bottom, pull the bottom gently toward us, and drop the back, and there we are. When we drop the back, the pulp sort of folds and flows over the hand mold, and at that point, you lift it up, and there you are. You have all the water draining down through the hand mold, and all the fibers caught on your screen, and you have formed a beautiful sheet of paper. Let's just take a little look at it right there. That, as soon as you get the water out of, will be a dry sheet of paper that you can write on, type on, draw on, or wrap with. Now, we'll put this here and carefully lift the decal off, and we are ready to remove some water. We will leave it on the grid, the support screen, and use that as sort of a drain rack. Now, I have a tray here. You don't absolutely need a tray, but it does help you control water. You could put this right on the surface of a table whose top is not bothered by water. Now, we have in our kits a cover screen, which you can put over the mat of wet fibers to protect it, and you have a marvelous water removal system in the form of a sponge. If you get a sponge, get a good one. There are those that work well, those that don't. To remove water, take the sponge, put it flat on top of the cover screen you have put down, take your whole hand on top, push down, and let up. That removes a lot of water. Many people go dibbity-dab-dab-dab like that and remove practically no water whatsoever. But this is the fast, efficient, good way to do it. And look at the water that you are removing. That's quite a bit. And there's more there. I would go over this 3 times at this point, because this is the easy way to get rid of water. Other and later methods are going to cost you a lot of work. So here's the point where you can get rid of a lot of water with your sponge. So don't spare the application of the sponge to the mat of wet fibers. Now we have that done. Oh yeah, wring your sponge out frequently, as I'm doing, so that it can continue to pick up water. Now, if we can get down and take a quite close look at this, we will peel this screen off like that, and I would peel it off rather than lifting it straight up. And there we have the sheet that we're working on. Now, we need this sheet off of that screen so we can press it. We can't press it on there. It's too weak to lift off. So what we're going to do is cooch it off, and that requires some kind of a material. With our kit, we have something called a press and dry cloth, and that will cooch or remove the mat of wet fibers from the screen for us. So we will put that down there, put the press and dry cloth over it like that, and turn the screen and the press cloth upside down, flat on the table like that. And now we're going to apply pressure again to get that mat of wet fibers to migrate from the screen to the press cloth. If you're going to apply pressure, use your sponge, because in addition to applying pressure, you will probably remove some water, and that will be very good indeed. So again, we apply the sponge with that same flat hand, using the entire area of the sponge, and press in that fashion. All right, I would go over it twice because, again, this is the simple and easy way to get rid of water. In addition to applying the pressure, that's what you're doing. And there we are. Now, here again, if we're going to take a good close look at this corner here, we'll show you something. When you raise this, the mat has migrated from the screen onto the press cloth. That's good. Now, sometimes it will come up with that. If it does, try the other corners. At one corner, this will probably occur. If that does not, take your thumbnail and sort of tease the sheet off and that way you can get the matted wet fibers off the screen. Again, peel off. Don't go zip like that because you can ruin the sheet there. Now we're ready for pressing. For that, we use the other press cloth, put it down on top like that, and we apply pressure. How you apply pressure here, the fibers don't really care. You can put a board on here and stand on it, have your friend back his car on it, whatever. Pressure is the point. I have cut a little piece of wood here that's just right for my hand, and that works really well, and you can really lean on it. Before I had this, I used a book inside a plastic sack. That makes a very good press bar also. So there's no shortage of things with which you can apply pressure, such as I'm doing here, and give it all the pressure that you can. So we are removing some more water. Now, at this point, we are ready to dry the sheet. We can dry the sheet in several ways. We're going to dry with an iron. You can take your iron and turn it up to as high a heat as is possible without having the iron stick on the cloth. Now, there's a variation in irons. This one I can turn up to its maximum heat, and it works beautifully. Others you turn up to about 3/4 and so forth, but you'll find that out as you work with it. Also, you can use your ironing board. That is an ideal surface upon which to do this. If you don't have that, we've made a simple little ironing board for portability. We have a cloth over a piece of wood and taped it on. Very simple, and it's easy to do. You can do that also. So we'll take our wet sheet, put it here like this, have the iron up to the maximum heat that is compatible with what we're trying to do, and put it on there, and not move it too fast. If you move it too fast, you will not get heat down to the sheet, which is what you're trying to do. If you see steam coming up, I don't know whether you can see this steam or not, you're doing all right because you're getting the water so hot in that sheet that it's boiling and turning into steam. That gives you a good standard by which to judge whether or not you're getting rid of any of the moisture. So when you get it started like this, you can move it a little bit more rapidly because you do have the sheet heated, so to speak. And as long as the steam is coming up, you are removing water. Now, another thing that happens, you may or may not be able to see it, the sheet gets light as it dries. So you can see light and dark areas as you're doing this, and that tells you about where you are in relation to drying the sheet. How long does this take? Well, the question relies pretty much upon how thick the sheet is. Obviously, the thinner your sheet, the more rapidly you're going to be able to dry it. The more thick the sheet, the more time it's going to take to dry it. So, generally speaking, if you are going to dry with an iron, don't make your sheet too thick. All right, now let's take the press cloth off and put the iron down directly on the sheet. And there we are, and again, now we've got more steam coming up. There are some light spots starting to show up in the middle, meaning that we are moving the drying along very, very good. And I'll tip this up, and maybe you can get a close look at what we mean when we say there are dry spots there. You can see perhaps the dry area there. So you know where you are as you're applying this heat. Now, to speed things up more, we will now remove the second press cloth, put this directly on our ironing board, and in no time at all, we will now have a sheet that we can write on, type on, draw on, or wrap with. One thing about drying with heat, when you throw 250 degrees of heat or so into this kind of a situation, things shrink. So there's a vast shrinkage forces going on in the sheet that we're looking at here. And they don't all pull at the same direction or at the same rate of force or anything. So one thing that's standard in drying with heat is what we call curl and cockle. You'll see some of that in the sheet here. there are a number of ways that you can get the sheet flatter. You can use your iron to achieve a less curled sheet, like this, for instance. If you put that there and sort of hold this up, you can straighten the sheet out. Also, if you take your sheet when you have finished and have it dry and have admired it, you can put it inside a heavy book or under a heavy book for overnight or so, and you'll have a nice, smooth, even sheet. But even here, with this, you have a sheet that you can indeed be proud of. And let's take a look at it right here. Just notice the crinkle and the crackle. It talks to you. Isn't that beautiful? Can you write on it? Certainly you can write on it, type on it, draw on it, or wrap with it. So, with the dip mold, you have made a sheet of paper. There are several commonly asked questions. One is, can I control how thick or how thin my paper will be? And the answer is yes. It's very simple. The thicker that the pulp is in your vat, the thicker your sheet will be. The thinner the pulp in the vat, the thinner your sheet will be. Briefly, this is fiber. The more of fiber in relation to water in your vat, the thicker the pulp will be. If there is more water than fiber, then your pulp is thinner. Which brings up a good point when making paper with a dip hand mold. After about every third sheet, you must replace some of the fiber to keep your pulp about the right thickness. So you take another 8.5 by 11 sheet, blend it in the blender, this time only with 3 cups of water. Pour that then into your vat, bringing your pulp back to about the right thickness. Now, another question is, how do I add botanicals and other things? There are 2 ways. You can add them in the blender or add them directly to the pulp in the vat. If you have a specialty pulp like this pulp with scrubbed corn husk, you would take about a touch like that for each 8.5 by 11 sheet, put it in there with the paper that you're going to recycle, turn the blender on. That will distribute the specialty pulp with the other fibers, pour it in there, dip a sheet, and if you do that and carry through the regular pressing and drying, you will get a sheet something like this. Now, the more you add, the more prominent the special pulp will be, the less prominent. If you have something like dried flowers, like this, they're best added to the pulp directly in the vat, though you can take them also and run them in the blender. That will give you a different distribution in your final sheet. Most important with dried flowers, there's a hard part down here, especially if you're going to dry with an iron. That's very difficult to handle. So you take them like this, and if you can get a good close look at this, you just pull the little petals loose from this. Do not use this. Use these either in the blender or directly in the pulp, and that will give you something like this. And another often asked question is, what kind of paper can I recycle? And the answer is any kind of paper. Take a look at this, for instance, out of any average house. Each one can be recycled, giving you color, either by colored paper or by ink. Old calendars from a church. Christmas wrapping paper, other wrapping paper, napkins, newspaper, and don't forget labels. Look at that beautiful color. An oleomargarine box will bring you this. If you turn the blender off on numerous colored napkins early, it'll get you this, and believe it or not, the outer layer off of a facial tissue box will get you this, and above all, do not forget to use something as exciting like this with metallic ink, or if you really want an adventure, try this. One decorative and art technique you would really like is called pulp painting. It's something that anybody can do. Second graders, adult artists can certainly exploit it. This is what's involved. We have prepared in advance this dipped sheet, And if you're going to paint, you need color, right? Well, here we have lots of color. And what it is red paper recycled, blue paper recycled, yellow paper, and green paper recycled. Now you're ready to do the painting. So a paintbrush that you can find and use with a lot of fun is a turkey baster. So you take the baster, put it in there like that. And if you're going to create an abstract, all you have to do is bang, bang, bang. A little red, a little blue. We can make a 4-color abstract here. If you don't like the turkey baster, put your pulp in something like this. As long as you can squeeze and get the pulp to come out, it'll make a very good paintbrush indeed. And we'll add a little yellow there like that. And finally some green, and we have, notice, a 4-color abstract. Isn't that amazing? Now, that's an abstract there. And I don't know if you want to take a little look at it or not. That's the way it is. You have really created something. If you want a specific image, it is quite easy to do. You can get other people's images. This is a cookie cutter. Or if you want your own image, draw it on some food board, take a hot wire and cut it out. This is my heart. Well, so to speak. This is a heart that I drew. Then we take that image, we'll take the heart, put it on there like that, and we're going to flatten this down a little bit so our pulp doesn't run. We don't want the colors to run. And let's make a red heart. So here we simply take the turkey baster and fill the pulp in on the screen. And if we use that as sort of a template, a pattern, we are going to have a heart. Now, normally one would keep the pulp that I'm putting in here in the image as well as the abstract quite thin, because we're going to put this on the other sheet, and if you have this too thick, you're going to have a hard time drying it again unless you dry it with pressure instead of heat. All right, we have done that, and we have a pulp painting. We have an abstract. On this side, we have a specific on this side, and this is what we call the final and very beautiful thing. We take it, turn it upside down so that the wet pulp on the cover screen meets the wet pulp of the surface of the sheet. We can put them any place that we like. Then we take our sponge, press down like that, and when we do that, the painting that we did transfers to the sheet, and you have a remarkable creation indeed. And there you are. You simply continue to press and dry it as we did before, and you have pulp painting. Now you can put a whole world of different textures, tactile and visual, on any surface of any sheet that you make. Let's take a look at this newly dipped sheet right here. There's absolutely no water removed from it. That surface is so susceptible, it is unbelievable. You can breathe on it and you'll make an impression on that surface. So if you want, for instance, a linen finish on your sheet, good. Get a piece of linen like this, and you put it directly over the sheet. Do your pressing and your drying as usual. Leave this on there until the sheet is dry, and that surface will have transferred to that. Or you can go to something as rugged as this. This has some very rigid lines in it, raised lines. You can take that and you'll put ridges on the surface of your paper. It's unbelievable. But what is really fun is here. Let's take a close look at this. This is a felt I picked up at some craft store, and it has little flowers all over the surface of it, cameo impression. Now we can take that, put that right down on this very wet surface, like that, pick it up, turn it over, do our usual water removal and pressing, and leave that felt on there until we get it dried, put the iron right on the felt, and then when you take that off, we have done one in white. Here is how the surface of the felt is transferred to the sheet, and that is a beautiful embossed sheet indeed. And these are just some examples of the things you can do by putting different surfaces down on your wet sheet of paper. Notice this. Very beautiful indeed. Here we took a plastic stencil, put it down on the wet sheet of paper, and left it there through the pressing and drying. Now let's move next door to this very beautiful item. These very small pieces here are impressions left by pieces of jewelry that, were put down on the wet sheet. When it was pressed and dried, we cut them out. Now let's move up a little bit over here Notice that. That's really some type of star, and it is really deeply embossed. We did that with a doily. So you put the doily on the wet sheet, leave it there through the pressing and drying. And the one I really like is right next to it here, this one right here. Isn't that beautiful? We found a ceiling tile that had that pattern on it. Wouldn't that make a beautiful journal cover? Well, every time you see a different surface or texture, you can transmit it to your sheet. You can make some very beautiful and some very delicate and very touching things with a technique called sheet layering. Okay, we have a wet sheet down here that I have dipped, and I can make another sheet, leave it wet, put it down on there, press, and the two will become one sheet. Now, before you put the second sheet on, you can lay something in there, and that is then embedded between the two sheets. Let's just take one example. We'll show you how this works. So here's a sheet that I've dipped. Now I dipped a second sheet right here. That's on the cover screen. Now we will put that wet sheet on top of this one. But before we put them together, note, we can take something like this. This is a yarn, and this is 20 inches for the size sheet that I'm making here. And we can put that right in there like that and tamp it down a little bit. Then we can take the other one, put it in there like that, and get these reasonably even. All right, there they are. Now I will take this very wet sheet. You don't take any water out because the strength of the bond between these two layers of pulp is going to depend on how much water is there. And the trick here is to get one sheet lined up with the other so that they match. And that's why I use the cover screen for making this second sheet, because I can see through it, and hopefully we will get a very, very good match. And there we are. If I can do this in front of cameras, you can certainly do it not in front of cameras. There we are. Now we will take that out, put it over here, and we will, in the usual fashion, remove some water like that. And in fact, what we would do is simply go through the regular paper making process of using press and dry sheets, removing water with this, that we do for making a regular sheet. The only difference is going to be that we have two pieces of yarn running through the middle. Now, it would take quite a while to iron and dry this, and we would certainly leave the press sheets over it as we dried it. But let's just leave it like this, and we'll show you several examples of what you can do when you have completed the pressing and drying of this sheet layering technique. Here is an example. Isn't that beautiful? And here are the two pieces of yarn which were in there. We took the 5.5 by 8 sheet, folded it once, and then if you're good, maybe if you're an old sailor like I am, you remember your knots. You can do a lot of beautiful things with delicate tying of knots. There's one example. Here's another example. Again, we had the big sheet, folded it into card size, and look at the tying that was done there. Then, if you want to add something, you can glue on some very decorative ribbon, and this is a bit of jewelry. Glue is a wonderful thing to add to the formula. Look at this. A little bit later on, when you're really practiced, you can leave a hole in one sheet, sheet layer, and you have a window for decoration. And there's some ribbon there. Now, you don't want to try this the first time, but later you can put things like this down on the wet sheet, get a very thin sheet, and pulp layer that over it, and then before you do any drying, remove some of the pulp so that you can see these different items. Like I said, don't try that right away, but look at what might be in your future.
You have been watching Papermaking with Arnold Grummer, featuring the dip hand mold. Remember, easy and successful papermaking comes with these two names, Arnold Grummer and Greg Markham Incorporated.
To learn more about papermaking and decorative techniques, check out Arnold Grummer's Complete Guide to Easy Papermaking, Arnold Grummer's Complete Guide to Paper Casting, or Tin Can Papermaking, Recycle for Earth and Art. by Arnold Grummer at your local library. Arnold Grummer has a full line of papermaking kits and supplies. Check your local dealer or write to Greg Markham Incorporated, Post Office Box 13245, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53213. Visit us on the web at www.arnoldgrummer.com.